Rain drummed on the concrete like slow applause the morning I found my granddaughter under the freeway. Madison stood in a blue tent with a crying baby pressed to her chest, thin as a shadow, eyes so stunned they looked glassed over. She whispered that I was dead, that her father, my son, had shown her an obituary. In that instant, a quiet life I thought I understood ripped at the seams. I took one breath, then another, and decided two things. I would take them home, and I would find out how my son had turned a lie into a weapon. 3 days earlier, I had been watering spider plants in my Minneapolis kitchen, easing into the tolerable boredom of retirement at 70, when a Facebook message blinked onto my screen from someone named Crystal Williams. Mrs. Henderson, I think your granddaughter needs help. She's been asking about you at the shelter. I felt the room tilt. Madison was supposed to be in California studying nursing. That was the last neat report my son Derek had offered, spoken with the airy certainty of a man who prefers his own version of the world. I typed back with trembling hands. Where is she? Which shelter? The reply came an hour later, an address downtown and a final shard. She has a baby now. Says her dad told her you passed away 2 years ago. By 9 a.m., I was driving toward the overpass, rain stitching the windshield into gray lace. Tents huddled along concrete pillars. The air smelled of wet wool, propane, and a bone-deep weariness that made kindness feel like an emergency. Crystal, a tired-eyed woman in her 40s, met me at the edge and pointed. Blue tent, blonde girl, been here about 6 months. I approached and called softly, Madison. The flap opened, and there she was, my beautiful girl, paler and thinner, but undeniably herself. The baby squirmed and fussed, wrapped in a threadbare towel. Grandma, she breathed, and then the sentence that salted the wound. Dad said you died of cancer. He showed me the obituary. I knelt into the mud without caring what it did to my slacks. Honey, I'm right here. She folded against me with a sob that shook the tent poles, and the baby began to wail as if translating our grief. We packed quickly 2 trash bags of clothes, a scuffed diaper bag, a blanket that smelled faintly of smoke, and I drove them home while Madison kept reaching over to touch my sleeve as if I might evaporate. At my house, I made formula-ran hot water, put towels in the dryer for warmth, and watched her face soften when she realized no one was going to take this away. Over chicken soup, she whispered the story she'd been made to believe that I was ill and didn't want the stress of her pregnancy, that later I had died, that there was no inheritance because I had been disappointed, that her tuition would be covered by funds from my estate, but the money never arrived. The cruelty of it was almost artful. I told her what I knew with the simple clarity that truth deserves. I had never been sick, never turned my back, never stopped loving her. When she cried again, I let her cry. The baby, Emma, 4 months old, fell asleep on my chest, a warm, exhausted stone of trust. While Madison napped, I began making calls. I started with my bank, moved to my financial advisor, and ended with my life insurance company. A thread pulled cleanly through all 3 6 months earlier. Someone had tried to claim my life insurance. A fraudulent death certificate existed with my name on it, dressed up with forged doctor signatures and a tidy medical history of a cancer I had never had. My advisor had fielded several calls from a man claiming to be the executor of my estate, inquiring about liquidating retirement accounts. Each sentence landed like a hammer. The insurance claim had been denied no verified death. After all, but denial wasn't the same thing as safety. If my son had been willing to counterfeit death, what wouldn't he do for money? Madison returned to the kitchen with damp hair and a startled kind of calm. Grandma, why would Dad tell me you were dead? I could only shake my head at the question I had asked myself since the moment I saw her. She showed me a text from a year ago. Grandma's estate lawyer said the education fund will release $50,000 next month. Stay focused on school. $50,000 promised from a fantasy. I thought of the missed classes, the eviction notice she'd described, the slow fall from dorm room to couch to tent, all under the shadow of a lie that had turned love into silence. I held Emma closer and felt something catch fire in my chest. By late afternoon, I had a list of facts and a single conclusion: Derek had not only erased me from his daughter's life, he had tried to rob me blind and use Madison's need as camouflage. I called an old friend, Patricia Wells, a steady-handed attorney, whose briefcases always looked like they could bench press a problem, and asked her to come by the next day. Then I dialed my son's office. When his secretary routed me through, I heard him go quiet on the line in a way that told me he understood the arithmetic had changed. "Mom," he croaked. I thought dead," I asked lightly. "Funny thing, Derek, I seem to have recovered. He said he could explain. I told him to try explaining to my face at 7 p.m. and to bring his wife. Madison will be here," I added, "and let the silence do the work that words cannot." After I hung up, I watched the rain ease into a silvery mist. Madison fed Emma while I set the table, an old ritual suddenly sacred again. The clock moved toward evening, and the house filled with the kind of quiet that carries a pulse. I thought about the boy Derek had been all knees and questions, and a grin that could melt a reprimand, and the man he had become fluent in excuses. Love is not blindness. It is a light you choose to keep on, even when it shows you what you don't want to see. At 7 p.m., his headlights swung into my driveway like a verdict. Derek walked in with the pinched smile of a man who thinks charm can outpace consequence. Laura lingered on the porch, hands wrapped around her phone like a flotation device. When Madison stepped from the kitchen with Emma on her hip, his face ran through an ugly traffic light of colors: shock, fear, irritation, before settling on the practiced neutrality of a salesman. He said he could explain, and I let him talk himself into smaller and smaller circles until the words sounded like air being let out of a tire. When he finally stopped, I placed a folder on the coffee table and told him what I knew: a fraudulent death certificate filed with multiple agencies, a denied life insurance claim leaning on fabricated medical records, calls to my advisor from a mysterious executor of an estate that did not exist, text messages promising Madison funds from that same fantasy. He said he had been trying to protect everyone, which in his mouth meant he had been protecting himself. Madison's voice cut cleanly through the room as she told him what it had felt like to be erased while pregnant, to grieve a grandmother who wasn't gone to hold an infant in a tent under concrete because the money he'd promised never arrived. He told her she had made her choices. I told him he had made his crimes. At 7:40 p.m., I set down the folder and told him what would happen next, my voice even as a ledger. He would return every penny he had stolen or diverted through accounts opened in my name. He would establish an education fund for Emma in the amount of $50,000 as partial restitution for months of hardship. He would submit to counseling because the shape of his choices was not a temporary lapse, but a blueprint. He laughed then, small and desperate, and asked where I expected him to conjure such money. I told him that was his problem, not mine, and that the deadline was Wednesday at 5 p.m., or I would pursue criminal charges. The clock ticked. Madison shifted Emma to her other arm and did not look away from her father. After he left Laura still in the car and refusing to meet our eyes, the house felt like a bell that had just been struck. Madison bathed Emma. I cleaned the kitchen with the deliberate care of someone calming a trembling animal. At 9:15 p.m., the doorbell rang and Patricia swept in with her briefcase, the scent of cold rain clinging to her coat. We sat at the table and walked through the landscape we were now crossing: identity theft, insurance fraud attempted, wire fraud if funds had been shifted between states. She slid papers toward me and said that if I wanted to prosecute, she could set it in motion by Thursday. The word prison landed between us with the gravity of a planet. I pictured the boy with grass-stained knees and the man who had told his daughter I was dead, and decided to give consequence one chance to do its quieter work first. We would hold him to the deadline and then decide. Tuesday arrived with a hard blue sky and the practicalities of caring for an infant. Madison took Emma to the pediatrician at 10 a.m. and came home with a list of vitamins formula recommendations and the cautious optimism of a doctor who had seen worse and expected better now. Derek rang my phone 3 times that afternoon. I watched it hum on the counter and let each call fall into voicemail like stones into a well. At 6:30 p.m., a text vibrated the screen. "We need to talk. This is insane." I typed back that insanity was faking your mother's death and stealing from your child. This was accountability. I slept deeply for the first time in days, asleep, untying knots. He arrived unannounced on Wednesday at 3 p.m., Laura beside him with the paper-thin dignity of someone who has been lied to and is slowly admitting she knew. He said he could raise $50,000 by Friday and proposed payments for the rest. I reminded him of the deadline and the full amount. Laura pleaded for their children for the scandal for the neighbors. But mercy without repair isn't mercy. It's permission. When I suggested he call his father-in-law, Laura flinched and asked how much Derek had already taken. He called it a loan. She asked him to name the number. $40,000, he murmured, and the lie about it being temporary sagged in the air like a sagging beam. I almost pitied her, then remembered Madison in the rain. At 4:47 p.m., my phone pinged with a bank alert wire received in the amount of $135,000. I showed Derek the notification. He sagged into the chair as if the money had been holding up his skeleton. He asked if we were finished. I told him no. He owed Madison a real apology. He owed Emma a fund with $50,000 that could not be touched by anyone but her future. He owed himself a reckoning that would take more than money to accomplish. He stared at the floor and then did the simplest difficult thing. He apologized to his daughter without explanation. She listened, held Emma, and said she would accept his attempt if it came with honesty and consistency. Laura watched the exchange with eyes like windows in winter. That night after they left, I made tea and opened the documents again the way you touch a bruise to judge its healing. Something in the insurance packet snagged my attention. The fake death certificate was not sloppy desperation. It was precise forged physician signatures that matched state board records too closely to be like a false medical history constructed across months as if someone had been planting breadcrumbs toward an inevitable end. Dated not from Madison's pregnancy, but 8 months earlier. The chill that ran through me was not only from the crime, but from its rehearsal. Derek had planned to bury me on paper long before he found cover for the shovelful. I called Patricia at 9:20 p.m. and asked her to look again with a criminal's eye. She arrived within the hour, read silently, and then said the sentence that opened a new door. This wasn't amateur work. My son had help. At 10:05 p.m., my phone rang with Derek's boy on the line, voice trembling. He had overheard his mother talking with her father. He had seen Derek meeting for weeks with a man named Vincent at a coffee shop near school. Expensive suit, expensive watch, an aura that made Derek look small. Patricia's pen slowed. She said what I did not want to hear: debts to the wrong people. Professionals who constructed fraud for a price and collected with interest you could feel on your skin. A danger that did not end with a bank alert. In the quiet after she left, I stood in the doorway to Madison's room and watched her sleep with Emma tucked into the harbor of her arm. Love is not blindness, I reminded myself. It is the stubborn refusal to go dark when the road narrows. Thursday morning broke with a heaviness in the air, the kind that presses against your chest before anything has even gone wrong. At 6 a.m., pounding on the door jolted me awake. Derek stood there, arm in a sling face, bruised purple and yellow like spoiled fruit. Laura wasn't with him this time. He didn't ask to come in. He leaned against the frame and said flatly, "They know I paid you back. Vincent's people came last night." Madison, drawn by the noise, stepped out of the kitchen with Emma on her hip. When she saw her father's battered face, her eyes filled with a complicated mixture of fear, pity, and rage. He said he'd gotten in debt with the wrong people, that the forged papers and accounts had cost money, and Vincent was the kind of man who expected repayment with interest. $200,000 plus interest. He admitted voice cracking, and for a moment, he looked less like a schemer and more like a boy cornered by wolves. I asked the question even as my stomach clenched against the answer. What kind of people are we dealing with, Derek? He looked up at me, eyes hollow, the kind that don't accept excuses, the kind that hurt families. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Nice house, Betty. Pretty granddaughter, too. Tell Derek we'll be in touch. I showed Patricia later that morning when she arrived, and her face tightened. She made calls to the FBI, words like organized crime and witness protection falling into the air like stones breaking ice. They'll need evidence, she said. Names, documentation, recordings. Without it, they won't move, and getting it would put you in danger. The word danger had already made itself at home in my house. Madison clutched Emma tighter that night, eyes darting toward every shadow, every sound outside. Fear had moved in with us, silent but thick as smoke. Friday dawned, and with it came resolve. Derek had made his choices, and so had Vincent, but no one threatened my granddaughter, and walked away thinking they owned the ground under my feet. At 9 a.m., I called Derek and told him to set up a meeting. With Vincent, I said when he hesitated, "Tell him I want to negotiate." He panicked, tried to protest, but I silenced him with the steel I'd earned over 70 years. Derek. I've been handling unreasonable men my whole life. The only difference is this one wears a better suit. Patricia tried to dissuade me, her voice a mixture of legal logic and genuine worry. I told her I wasn't playing hero. I was being a grandmother. That was the only role I'd ever chosen with my whole heart, and I wasn't about to let Vincent rewrite it. Saturday at 2 p.m., the Harbor Club glittered with the arrogance of men who thought money made them invincible. The chandeliers dripped crystals, the carpets muffled footsteps like secrets. Vincent was waiting in a back room, silver-haired, manicured, and flanked by two men who looked like they'd been carved from stone. "Mrs. Henderson," he said smoothly, as if we were two old friends meeting for tea, "Derek's told me so much about you." I sat across from him and folded my hands. "I'm sure he has," I said. "Let's talk business. What exactly do you want?" He smiled thin and sharp. $200,000 plus $50,000 for the inconvenience. Pay and your family remains healthy and whole. He said it like he was reciting a grocery list, casual, practiced. I kept my expression calm. "I have a counteroffer. $100,000 today. In exchange, you forget Derek exists and you never contact my family again." He laughed the kind of laugh men use when they think they've already won. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm not a bank. I don't negotiate." "You're right," I said, pulling my phone from my purse. "You're not a bank. You're a criminal. And I've been recording this conversation since I walked in." The change in the air was immediate. The two men at his side shifted closer, their presence suddenly heavy. Vincent raised a hand to stop them, his eyes narrowing. "You're making a mistake, old woman." I stood sliding my phone back into my bag with deliberate calm. The mistake was threatening my granddaughter. "Here's how this works. You take the $100,000 and walk away, or this recording goes to the FBI along with Derek's testimony about your operation." He leaned back, measuring me. "No one will believe a desperate old woman and her criminal son." I smiled the smile I had perfected during decades of accounting disputes, the one that said I'd already checked the math twice. "They don't need to believe me. They only need to investigate you. Can you afford that kind of attention?" Silence stretched so taut I could almost hear it crack. Finally, Vincent exhaled low and reluctant. $100,000. "Today. In cash," I said, "and a written agreement that you'll never contact my family again." He called it a dangerous game. I told him that at my age, every day was a dangerous game, but at least now I had something worth playing for. 3 hours later, I walked into my kitchen with a signed agreement in my purse and the quiet satisfaction of a battle not only survived, but won. Derek was waiting on the porch, eyes wide with disbelief. "Mom, you could have been killed." I brushed past him with Emma in my arms. "Derek, I've been dealing with bullies longer than you've been alive. Vincent was just better dressed. Madison met us in the hallway. Is it over?" she asked, voice trembling. "It's over," I told her. That night, we ate takeout Chinese around the table, the three of us and Emma with Derek, hovering like a man, suddenly unsure where to sit. After months of rain and mud and lies, the soup was the sweetest meal I had ever tasted. Yet in the corner of my mind, one truth still pressed like a bruise. Peace had been bought. But Vincent wasn't finished. Not really. Men like him rarely were. The next weeks felt like living in the echo of a storm. On the surface, life stitched itself back together. Madison began her nursing classes online, while I watched Emma nap on a blanket in the living room. Derek started counseling and picked up extra hours at a second job, and for the first time in months, there was laughter in the house that didn't sound borrowed. But underneath, I carried the knowledge that Vincent was still out there, the signed agreement tucked into my safe, like a thin wall against a hurricane. I kept the doors locked, the lights on, and my phone charged. At night, when Madison's steady breathing came through the wall, I reminded myself that love isn't freedom from fear. It's choosing to stand guard anyway. 2 months later, life handed us a small miracle. Madison walked across a stage in a pressed white gown, Emma babbling in my lap while Derek clapped with a pride that softened the edges of the man he had become. She graduated with a 3.8 GPA, proof of resilience, carved from hardship. Afterward, we sat at my favorite restaurant steam, rising from bowls of soup as Madison raised her glass. "To Grandma, who saved us all," she said. "To family," I corrected. "Family who saves each other." Derek touched his glass to ours, voice quiet. "To second chances." For the first time, I allowed myself to believe he might mean it. But fate wasn't done with us yet. One winter afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Henderson," the voice said, crisp and official. "This is Agent Sarah Martinez with the FBI. I wanted to inform you that Vincent Carrile was arrested this morning, along with 12 associates. Racketeering, money laundering, extortion. The recording you provided was crucial." I sank into my chair, the world tilting. I had gone to that meeting to protect my granddaughter, and somehow I had helped dismantle a criminal network stretching across 3 states. "He's facing 20 years minimum," the agent continued. "Your testimony will help secure the case. But I wanted you to know your family is safe." Safe. The word landed with such force, I almost wept. After months of locking windows twice, after glancing over shoulders in parking lots, after listening for footsteps outside at night, the nightmare had ended. That evening, Derek came for dinner, shoulders lighter than I'd seen in years. When I told him about Vincent's arrest, he went pale, then asked the question that had lived in all of us. What if someone comes after us? What if his people? I cut him off gently. Derek Vincent made his choice when he threatened Emma. Whatever comes, we face it together now. Madison nodded Emma, clapping at nothing in particular, and in that moment I believed we could. Spring arrived with blossoms that felt like second chances. Madison finished her first semester with high marks. Emma took her first steps across my living room rug, and Derek Jr. and Sophie asked to spend Christmas with us. Laura drove them over herself, grief and regret, written in her posture, but committed to mending what could be mended. Christmas morning, we gathered around the tree paper and ribbon, flying Emma, squealing as she pulled tissue paper from a box. Derek leaned close and whispered, "Mom, I know I don't deserve it, but thank you for not giving up on me." I looked at him. Then, not the thief who had forged my death, not the desperate man slumped in my kitchen chair, but my son, older, now humbled, trying. "Derek," I said softly, "family doesn't give up. We fight. sometimes with each other, sometimes for each other. But we fight. By summer, Madison had secured a job at the Children's Hospital. Emma toddled through my garden, fistfuls of marigolds clutched in her tiny hands, while Derek painted the porch as if he were patching more than wood. One afternoon, Madison sat beside me at the kitchen table and said, "Grandma, I used to think family was about who you were born to. Now I think it's about who shows up." I reached across and squeezed her hand. Showing up is everything I said. It was the truest thing I'd ever known. Looking back now, I see that the rainy morning under the bridge was not just a rescue, it was a rebirth. For Madison, who found her strength in the ashes of betrayal. For Derek, who learned that consequence could carve a new shape into an old life. And for me, who discovered that 70 was not an ending, but the beginning of a fiercer chapter. Vincent had made a fatal mistake. He underestimated a grandmother's love. What he didn't know was that grandmothers are the most dangerous creatures on earth when their families are threatened. We fight with everything we are, and we don't stop until the people we love are safe. So, if you've listened this far, thank you for sharing this journey with me. Remember, family isn't perfect, but it's worth protecting. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what would you fight for, no matter the cost? Your voice matters here just as much as mine.